You are listening to Confessions of a Counselor podcast with Janice, mental health in bite-sized chunks. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Confessions of a Counselor. I'm your host, Janice, and in today's episode, I thought we would talk about what is the function of grief, what's happening in my body, and what am I experiencing when I am feeling grief. Okay, let's jump right in. So there's lots of talk about grief on the internet, between friends, in our media, right? There's lots happening around the topic of grief. And I think that those are all really important conversations to have. So we can talk about lots of different theories as to what we're experiencing when we're experiencing grief. So some of the big buzz conversations are kind of the 5 stages of grief, moving from anger into acceptance and a wide range of feelings in between. We can also talk about the theory of kind of life growing around our grief, right? So our grief does not actually get smaller over time, but rather we kind of develop a life around that grief. And so it feels less overwhelming over time. So there's lots we can talk about in terms of grief. On this episode, I'd like to kind of focus on what is the function of grief. Why am I experiencing grief? Kind of not what's happening, but why am I experiencing it? Right. So why is it important to go through the process of grief? Um, why am I experiencing it, and kind of what's happening in my body? So, in terms of grief, we are often talking about the loss of something or someone. So most often the conversation kind of surrounds around the loss of a loved one in terms of death. But grief can also be the loss of a thing, right? The loss of a house, the loss of a relationship, the loss of stability in our lives, right? The loss of a job, right? Grief comes in many different forms, not just the loss of someone to death. So the function of it is to kind of help us process the ending of something, right? So loss is I no longer have this thing. So grief is the process of learning to accept, learning to navigate the end of something. And oftentimes we don't do so well at this as humans, and that's okay, right? Because it is overwhelming. And we are creatures of habit, we are creatures of stability. We want things to stay the same because in our minds, that kind of indicates safety. So the process of grief is actually there to navigate through until our brains can kind of attach to safety again. This is normal. This is okay. So that is kind of the function of grief, right? So to go from this is uncertain, I don't know what's happening, why is this ending, why is this no longer here, into that place of acceptance where I can say this is my new normal, it's okay, and I am able to move on from here. So that the function of grief, that function of overwhelm, that function of kind of constantly thinking about that thing that we lost or that person that we lost is helping us to move into acceptance that that is no longer true. So the function of grief is actually really important and helps us process, but can feel overwhelming, and definitely something to continue to talk about with our loved ones, and even asking for professional help through our process of grief. Okay. So I hope that that helps you kind of understand what's happening, in that this is a function to kind of help me process that loss, to process the ending of something, and move forward into what is our new normal. Until next time, take care. I
hope you enjoyed today's episode. Confessions of a Counselor podcast is available anywhere you like to listen to your podcasts, both on Apple and Android. New episodes are released every Friday. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to join the conversation, leave a review, or subscribe to the podcast hosted on Spotify. You can find all these details on janicelyons.com. Until next time, take care.